So you've probably been through a situation where you either needed to say a word, but you couldn't remember it, or that you had to speak in English, but you simply didn't know how to say something, even though you know it perfectly in your own language. I totally know how you feel. When I was learning Hebrew, I found it so complicated because virtually every word was completely different from the equivalent in English.
שתי שבועות.
I had to think so hard just to put together a sentence because the vocabulary did not come naturally to me. So to help you and me, this lesson brings 3 experts' easy and practical tips to improve your vocabulary. Each of them has learned at least 5 foreign languages, so trust me that they have a lot of experience learning a lot of words. And if you are anything like me, when you learn a language, you want to be able to understand it, even when it is spoken fast. You want to be understood by anyone and actually use that language to connect with others, not just be stuck studying in a classroom. Well, this is exactly what we'll help you to do here on Real Life English. So don't wait to join our global community. Subscribe so that you don't miss any of our new lessons. So I thought about starting by asking you, Idauza. One of our learners recently shared that she wants to express herself in English the same that she does in her native language. Now, I know this is true for many learners that have been studying English for a very long time. So what's something that they can do in order to build those sets of vocabulary skills that they need?
So to give an example of the student not too long ago, he was in Mexico and he had some kind of, infestation of some kind of insect or whatever. So he had to call the exterminator, right? So I'm like, cool. So you're going to have an experience where an exterminator comes to your house. What's going to happen? What would you, if it was America, what kind of interaction would you have with him? You'd explain to him this, right? So we had the spreadsheet up and I had him talking in English and he's like, oh, I'd ask him this. And then I'm putting in these vocabulary words in the respective columns of characters, actions, settings, like exterminator, roach, whatever, all that kind of stuff. And you keep talking, you populate it. And then it's like, cool, which of these words do you know? Which ones you don't? And then you're like, okay, I don't know this one, so let's look them up. All right, great. Now practice role play and do that scene using these words. So the idea is you think, either you think ahead of time, what am I going to need to accomplish what I think I need to accomplish? But perhaps even better is you go and you actually live the experience and then you didn't have something. You're like, oh, I wish I had the word for Airbnb. I wish I had the word for this, right? Coming off of that experience and reflecting back on it, then you say, okay, I needed these words. So the key idea here is relevance. And it's like what's relevant can only be relevant personally to you. So one of the things I try to cultivate in people is to cultivate a sensibility of relevance.
Yeah, it's very, very active way of learning for sure. And going off this too, because I think it's really interesting that you have these different categories that allow you to practice role-playing or to practice stringing sentences together, it's again, like learning in chunks is much more effective than just trying to memorize a list of vocabulary. Now, do you agree that memorizing lists of words is not very effective? Pause the video for a second and share with us how you learn new words in English. Now, I want to hear from Gabe what he would advise learners to do to actually remember information so that you can use those new words that you learned when you have the opportunity to speak.
There are computer programs that will figure out when you should review a thing before you forget it. These are the spaced repetition programs that people use like Anki. That part is a problem that has been solved pretty well. And so we have sort of functional words, we have words that change, and then we have word order. And those 3 things, those are the labels you can apply to every single language of all humanity. Those are the only techniques we have. Mm-hmm. And so if you have a way to store that in terms of if there's a way to present that in a flashcard such that you actually store that information in your head, then you can take apart any language as long as you can understand the gist of the story and then encode those into flashcards. Let's say we take the word by as a really straightforward one. So this book is by Shakespeare. The word by doesn't look like anything, but in the context of this book is by Shakespeare, or the play was by Shakespeare. If I know the word play and I know the word book, I can have a sentence like, the book is blank Shakespeare. And I can have a picture of Shakespeare and I have a picture of him writing the book, whatever I want. I mean, there's a million pictures that could work with that thing. It could just be people playing on stage. It could just be I'm holding a book, lots of things. But as long as I understood the gist of that sentence and then I chose the right picture that helped me remember that experience of being like, oh, bye. That's the one you used to tell who wrote the thing. Then tomorrow when I see that flashcard and it says, this book is blank Shakespeare, and it shows a picture of someone holding a book, then I can think, oh yeah, that was that by thing. That was the functional word that lets me tell who wrote the thing. Same deal with word order. If I just have a flashcard that says, why is it the book is by Shakespeare versus the book Shakespeare by? And so I can have another sentence that says the book is Shakespeare, and it says by, put this in the sentence in the right spot. Same deal. I'm not relying on translations. I'm not relying on anything except for the word order part. And then similarly with conjugations, if I have a thing like I would have done it, and it says I blank have done it, and it asks, what's the dictionary form of this? What's the original form? What is the form that this refers to? And so would is the right answer of what it becomes. That's the vocabulary chunk. That's that little fixed piece in the exact same way that by was. But the only thing special about word forms is that there is the conjugated form that lands in that story, and then there's some other form that lands in the dictionary. I'm going to the store. Well, why is it am going? Like the actual root form is to go. And so I need to remember 2 bits of information instead of 1. I need to remember I am going to the store, but I also need to remember that am going is a form of the word to go. And so if I ask both of those questions, then that's how I store that information. I blank to the store. I have this picture of someone running to the store. I remember because I encoded it myself. I picked the picture myself that this is about something happening in the future. But now I'm asking a different question, not just what's the fill in the blank, but what's the dictionary form there? And I can think, oh, to go. That's enough to store all information in all languages. It doesn't matter how complex the grammar is, as long as you can understand the story, because humans can only really mess with words in those 3 ways. It allows you to store everything. And so learning grammar is a matter of getting some exposure to stories. There is benefit in you understanding the rules behind those stories. I understand why is it am going as opposed to, am gone. When do you use the ing form? And so you understanding the rough rule and you saying, okay, I get the rule and I get how it applies to this story, and now I'm going to learn it with one of these flashcards. Then that is enough for you to both retain the right word for the right context and also retain the rule. And when you've done both of those things, then you just move on to the next one. It means that instead of having to do grammar drills where you're going to do I am going, I am walking, I am jumping, and just doing that 1,000 times, you do it twice, and then you move on to the next rule. Mm-hmm. And twice is enough. Honestly, once is often enough. And so that's generally our approach towards grammar: is expose someone to a rule, give them 3 or 4 stories, allow them to choose a couple stories, move them to the next rule.
I have found that one of the best ways to solve this issue of not remembering vocabulary is to use it as soon as possible after learning it. So for example, when I learn a new word or expression in Catalan, I will try to fit it into a conversation that I have on that very same day. Now, I live in Barcelona, so it is easy for me to use my Catalan every single day because it is the native language here. But I know that a lot of you do not have the privilege of living in an English-speaking country. But guess what? One of the periods when my Catalan improved the most was when I was living in Chile. There, the only native language is Spanish. So how did I do this? Well, I followed a lot of the advice that you've heard so far. I listened to the radio and music in Catalan. I read books in Catalan. And I even used the website Couchsurfing to find Catalan speakers living in Santiago de Chile and made a few friends with whom I could practice regularly. Anytime I encountered a new word, I would note it down, and once per day I would look up the new vocabulary and expressions and add them to my Anki to practice. I was so motivated because I did not want to lose contact with this language just because I was not living in the country where it was spoken. Now, a lot of these things you can do easily with your English. But if you are like most learners, then you are frustrated because you do not have enough opportunities to speak English. That is exactly why we developed the RealLife English app for you. where you can practice your English speaking anytime, anywhere, at the touch of a button for free. And in addition to this, you will improve your listening and learn tons of useful vocabulary with interviews from experts and teachers like you are seeing today, with an interactive transcript and vocabulary definitions. So give it a try. You can download it now by clicking up here or down in the description below, or simply search for RealLife English in the Apple app or Google Play Store. So I simply loved how both Idauza and Gabriel mentioned stories as a source for learning. I know that Ollie is a big fan of them as well. Can you explain how to make the most out of stories to learn the language?
The way that I like to apply the 80-20 rule in language learning is to think, okay, you can do all of these things. You can read books, you can watch TV, you can speak, you can learn grammar. But what is the one thing that's going to get you most of your results? And then just spend all of your time doing that. So in my case, I don't really believe that learning lists of words is very helpful. I don't believe that studying grammar is very helpful. What I believe is that input should be the thing that you spend most of your time on, because input is where you're going to actually learn the language and have the opportunity to learn words, learn phrases, learn grammar. And so that can be watching TV series, like in your approach. It can be reading books of stories, like in my approach. But what I like to do when I'm learning a new language is to spend 80% of my time on input, and then just 20% of my time on other things. There's always going to be a balance. You need a little bit of this and a little bit of that. That's inevitable. But I think because of our education system, the way that we're taught in schools, the balance is like this, in favor of traditional study and tests. And like that stuff isn't wrong. That can be useful, but it shouldn't be 80% of what we do. It should be maybe 20% of what we do. And so I think in language learning in general, the balance is wrong. We have the balance wrong, and we need to reverse that balance so we can spend a little bit of time learning grammar or whatever, but then most of our time should be actually with input and immersion, which is how we learn our mother tongue. You know, if you think about how you learned English, Ethan, you know, it was by hearing English spoken by your family all around you, by, you know, bedtime stories and things like that. We learn our languages by being immersed in it, and so that's the thing that we should borrow from native speakers. Learning a language through a story is a very, very holistic experience. It uses our whole brain, and when you use your whole brain, you form connections, and that's how memories are formed as well. So stories give you the whole language all together in one place, and that's why they're so powerful.